Hello, and welcome to the Shipwreck Archive.
Thank you. Would you happen to have The High Cost of the Sands for Admiral Gardner and Britannia?
Here we are. Enjoy!
The fishermen of Ramsgate, Deal, and Broadstairs headed out in their small boats despite the foul weather and the bitter cold of late January. Their mission was not one that could wait until the storm died down. Every minute had the chance of costing lives. There was no telling how long it would be before the wrecks on the Goodwin Sands started to break up, and the men who were sheltering in them were torn from them and into the raging seas. The Goodwin Sands were no strangers to shipwrecks, but to have 3 ships wreck on the sands at the same time was a matter of note. A terrible storm had blown in just as the ships had headed from the Downs, and as the gale had blown, the ships had found themselves compelled onto the southern head of the Goodwin Sands. 2 of the ships were British East India Company ships traveling together, carrying a good deal of coins in silver and copper that were bound for Madras. The 3rd ship was a brig named the Apollo, which had also wrecked not far from the 2 East India ships. The people on the shore gazed out on the ocean, hoping to see some sign of life on any of the ships that would allow to show that there were survivors. The initial letter to London from Deal was not sanguine. The seas were still high, and no one had been able to reach the ships yet to render aid. There were people seen in the 4 masts of one ship, but when the Deal fishermen attempted to reach them, they were defeated by the heavy seas and had to turn back. The ship was almost under water now, and clearly still sinking. The people on land feared that the crews of the ships had been torn from the wrecks and into the sea by the angry surf that surged over them. One of the East India ships, the Admiral Gardner, had been the first to run aground when the storm blew in. Both they and the other East India ship, the Britannia, had dropped their anchors and attempted to ride out the storm, but the ships dragged their anchors when faced with the powerful onslaught. At some point during the gale, the pilot had announced that his sounding said that there were only 5 fathoms of water beneath her. In such shallow water, the ship was in immediate danger, and it was considered best by the pilot to cut the anchor cable so that they could try to steer her further from shore. The pilot was a man who specialized in the English Channel, and though the captain questioned why he had not warned that they were so close to shore before, he only stood by as the pilot went forward with an axe. The pilot perhaps should have only given the order rather than taking on the task himself, because instead of cutting the anchor chain, he instead cut off 2 fingers from his left hand. Almost immediately upon his injury, he became delirious and had to be carried below and into the care of the ship's surgeon. Now without a pilot, the captain took his own sounding to see what immediate danger they were in, and to his amazement, he found that the ship had 14 fathoms of water underneath her, rather than the 5 that the pilot had read. With hope renewed, they let the anchor continue to do its best to hold them against the raging sea, and turned their attention back to the sails. They had almost brought the sails under control, gaining themselves a little more peace, when the cable to the bower anchor snapped, and the stern anchor began to drag again. The quartermaster began to make a sounding countdown to their destruction. First, 10 fathoms, then 7, and only a minute later 5. The captain ordered that the masts be cut away to reduce the danger to the ship once they were on ground. But even as he gave the order, he could see the breakers beneath them, and they were still in the act of cutting away the masts when the ship grounded. Immediately, a giant wave swept over them. They were now completely helpless on the sands, and they could only hold on with the hope that someone would see their plight and managed to fight the angry surf to effect a rescue. It did not take long for the Britannia to follow the fate of the Admiral Gardner, though the pilot on board of her was more effective than the one on the Admiral Gardner. As he found that the ship was in danger of going into shallow water, he first dropped one anchor and then two more. Unfortunately, against the power of the gale, all three anchors would prove to be in vain, and the ship dragged them until she was aground as well. The last ship to ground was the Apollo, a brig that had been intended to travel from London to Curaçao, but had made it only a very short way on her journey. The captain of the Apollo had not been willing to wait for a rescue. Unlike the men on the two British East India ships, he and 10 members of his crew got into the ship's longboat with the intention of reaching safety. The seas were still too strong for such an attempt, however, and the small boat was upset by the waves, drowning all on board of her. The one remaining crewman, who had refused to get onto the longboat because he viewed it as too dangerous, clung to the rigging of the ship and joined the weight of the rest of the crews stranded on the Goodwin Sands for a rescue. The local fishermen did not disappoint. It took almost a day for the waters to grow calm enough for them to make another attempt. But finally, the men from Deal set out once again, and this time they reached the Admiral Gardner. In the end, even though the Admiral Gardner had been on the sands the longest, it had the smallest loss of life, with only one man not surviving to make it back to safe ground. The fishermen from Deal were also able to rescue the one remaining man who had sheltered in the rigging of the Apollo. Across the bay, the men of Broadstairs and Ramsgate also mobilized, and joined the men from Deal in the rescue. They moved the men from the stricken Britannia, though the cost of life on the Britannia was heavier than it had been on the Admiral Gardner. In the end, 7 of the men from the Britannia died before they made it back to shore, including one man who died of exhaustion and exposure while in the boats headed to safety. The toll that the ordeal took on the men who had been tossed around in the storm and then shipwrecked was heavy, and many of them had to convalesce for a time before they were ready to travel again. The British East India Company had also suffered a blow, especially since the Admiral Gardner had not been insured due to her only carrying copper coins. The Britannia had been insured, but only at a fraction of her value, and the total estimated loss of the two ships was estimated to be about $200,000. A good deal of money for the time, though hardly enough to be a financial burden on the prosperous East India Company. As with all things, the wreck of the two East India ships faded from the public mind until 1976, when sand was dredged from the Goodwin Sands in order to help with construction at Dover Harbor. With the sand, copper coins were also dredged up. The exact location the coins had come from was still uncertain, however, until a fisherman reported a snag. Divers went to investigate and found a wreck. There was almost immediately great interest by many parties, all of them hoping that it was the Britannia and her cargo of silver coins. Initial salvage operations started in 1984, recovered over 1 million copper coins, but also caused a good deal of concern. It was clear now that the wreck was now the Admiral Gardner, not the Britannia. But that did by no means lessen the potential historical value, and the initial salvage operation showed no interest in preservation or archaeological oversight. The site was designated a historical site, and while salvage work continued, it was continued under license and more scrutiny. In total, the coins that were salvaged are only about half of what she had been carrying when she sank. Since the 1990s, the wreck has been redesignated an historical site. and unlicensed activity is not allowed within 150 meters of it. This includes dredging, so the chance of more coins being brought up in this way is unlikely. Salvage work has not continued, and the ever-changing sands have kept her mostly buried and well preserved, out of the sight of potential unlicensed treasure hunters. The Britannia's final location remains lost, along with all of her valuable cargo. The Goodwin Sands seem less willing to give her up. The Apollo has the least public interest, and her resting place has also never been discovered. She has been entirely overshadowed by the dreams of riches that people have when they view the sands and imagine silver coins resting somewhere beneath them. For more information about the many shipwrecks on the Goodwin Sands, please see the Goodwin Sands Conservation Trust. And for more information about the wrecks of the Admiral Gardner, Britannia, and Apollo, please see our sources in the description below. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for visiting the Shipwreck Archives. See you soon.